This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Gods of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs and read by J.D. Weber on the South Shores of Lake Superior. Chapter 3. The Chamber of Mystery. For moments after that awful laugh had ceased reverberating through the rocky room, Tarkis and I stood in tense and expectant silence. But no further sound broke the stillness, nor within the range of our vision did aught move. At length Tarkis laughed softly, after the manner of his strange kind when in the presence of the horrible or terrifying. It is not a hysterical laugh, but rather the genuine expression of the pleasure they derive from the things that move earthmen to loathing or to tears. Often and again have I seen them roll upon the ground in mad fits of uncontrollable mirth when witnessing the death agonies of women and little children beneath the torture of that hellish green Martian fete, the Great Games. I looked up at Thark, a smile upon my own lips, for here in truth was greater need for a smiling face than a trembling chin. "What do you make of it all?" I asked. "Where in the deuce are we?" He looked at me in surprise. "Where are we?" he repeated. "Do you tell me, John Carter, that you know not where you be?" That I am upon Barsoom is all that I can guess, and but for you and the great white apes, I should not even guess that, for the sights I have seen this day are as unlike the things of my beloved Barsoom as I knew it 10 long years ago, as they are unlike the world of my birth. No, Tarkis, I know not where we be. Where have you been since you opened the mighty portals of the atmosphere plant years ago, after the keeper had died and the engines stopped, and all Barsoom was dying, that had not already died, of asphyxiation? Your body even was never found, though the men of a whole world sought after it for years, though the Jeddak of Helium and his granddaughter, your princess, offered such fabulous rewards that even princes of royal blood joined in the search. There was but one conclusion to reach when all efforts to locate you had failed, and that you had taken the long, last pilgrimage down the mysterious river Ish, to await in the Valley Dor upon the shores of the lost Sea of Chorus, the beautiful Dejathoris, your princess. Why you had gone none could guess, for your princess still lived. "Thank God," I interrupted him, "I did not dare to ask you, for I feared I might have been too late to save her. She was very low when I left her in the royal gardens of Tardos Mors, that long-gone night, so very low that I scarcely hoped even then to reach the atmosphere plant ere her dear spirit had fled from me for ever." "And she lives yet?" "She lives, John Carter. You have not told me where we are," I reminded him. "We are where I expected to find you, John Carter, and another. Many years ago you heard the story of the woman who taught me that the thing that green Martians are reared to hate, the woman who taught me to love. You know the cruel tortures and the awful death her love won for her at the hands of the beast Talhajash. She, I thought, awaited me by the lost Sea of Chorus. You know that it was left for a man from another world, for yourself, John Carter, to teach this cruel Thark what friendship is, and you, I thought, also roamed the carefree Valley Dor. Thus were the two I most longed for at the end of the long pilgrimage I must take some day, and so as the time had elapsed which Dejathoris had hoped might bring you once more to her side, for she has always tried to believe that you had but temporarily returned to your own planet, I at last gave way to my great yearning, and a month since I started upon the journey, the end of which you have this day witnessed. Do you understand now where you be, John Carter?" "And that was the river Ish, emptying into the lost Sea of Chorus, in the Valley Dor?" I asked. "This is the Valley of Love and Peace and Rest to which every Barsoomian since time immemorial has longed to pilgrimage at the end of a life of hate and strife and bloodshed," he replied. "This, John Carter, is heaven." His tone was cold and ironic, its bitterness but reflecting the terrible disappointment he had suffered. Such a fearful disillusionment, such a blasting of life-long hopes and aspirations, such an uprooting of age-old tradition might have excused a vastly greater demonstration on the part of the Thark. I laid my hand upon his shoulder. "I am sorry," I said, nor did there seem aught else to say. "Think, John Carter, of the countless billions of Barsoomians who have taken the voluntary pilgrimage down this cruel river since the beginning of time, only to fall into the ferocious clutches of the terrible creatures that today assailed us. There is an ancient legend that once a red man returned from the banks of the lost Sea of Chorus, returned from the Valley Dor, back through the mysterious river Ish, and the legend has it that he narrated a fearful blasphemy of horrid brutes that inhabited a valley of wondrous loveliness, brutes that pounced upon each Barsoomian as he terminated his pilgrimage and devoured him upon the banks of the lost sea where he had looked to find love and peace and happiness. But the ancients killed the blasphemer, as tradition has ordained that any shall be killed who return from the bosom of the river of mystery. But now we know that it was no blasphemy, that the legend is a true one, and that the man told only of what he saw. But what does it profit us, John Carter, since even should we escape we also would be treated as blasphemers? We are between the wild throat of certainty and the mad zitadar of fact. We can escape neither. As earthmen say, we are between the devil and the deep sea, Tarkis, I replied. Nor could I help but smile at our dilemma. There is naught that we can do but take things as they come, and at least have the satisfaction of knowing that whoever slays us eventually will have far greater numbers of their own dead to count than they will get in return. White ape or plant man, green Barsoomian or red man, whosoever it shall be that takes the last toll from us, will know that it is costly in lives to wipe out John Carter, Prince of the House of Tardos Mors, and Tarkis, Jeddak of Thark, at the same time. I could not help but laugh at him grim humor, and he joined in with me in one of those rare laughs of real enjoyment, which was one of the attributes of this fierce Tharkian chief, which marked him from the others of his kind. "But about yourself, John Carter," he cried at last. "If you have not been here all these years, where indeed have you been? And how is it that I find you here today?" "I have been back to earth," I replied, "for 10 long years. I have been praying and hoping for the day that would carry me once more to this grim old planet of yours, for which, with all its cruel and terrible customs, I feel a bond of sympathy and love even greater than for the world that gave me birth. For 10 years have I been enduring a living death of uncertainty and doubt as to whether Dejah Thoris lived, and now that for the first time in all these years my prayers have been answered and my doubt relieved, I find myself, through a cruel whim of fate, hurled into the one tiny spot of all of Barsoom from which there is apparently no escape, and if there were, at a price which would put out for ever the last flickering hope which I may cling to of seeing my princess again in this life. And you have seen today with what pitiful futility man yearns towards a material hereafter. Only a bare half hour before I saw you battling with the plant men, I was standing in the moonlight upon the banks of a broad river that taps the eastern shore of earth's most blessed land. I have answered you, my friend. Do you believe?" "I believe," replied Tarkis, "though I cannot understand." As we talked I had been searching the interior of the chamber with my eyes. It was, perhaps, 200 feet in length and half as broad, with what appeared to be a doorway in the center of the wall directly opposite that through which we had entered. The apartment was hewn from the material of the cliff, showing mostly dull gold in the dim light which a single minute radium illuminator in the center of the roof diffused throughout its great dimensions. Here and there polished surfaces of ruby, emerald, and diamond patched the golden walls and ceilings. The floor was of another material, very hard and worn by much use to the smoothness of glass. Aside from the 2 doors I could discern no sign of other aperture, and as one we knew to be locked against us I approached the other. As I extended my hand to search for the controlling button, that cruel and mocking laugh rang out once more, so close to me this time that I involuntarily shrank back, tightening my grip upon the hilt of my great sword. And then from the far corner of the great chamber a hollow voice chanted, "There is no hope, there is no hope. The dead return not, the dead return not, nor is there any resurrection. Hope not, for there is no hope." Though our eyes instantly turned toward the spot from which the voice seemed to emanate, there was no one in sight, and I must admit that cold shivers played along my spine and the short hairs at the base of my head stiffened and rose up, as do those upon a hound's neck when in the night his eyes see those uncanny things which are hidden from the sight of man. Quickly I walked toward the mournful voice, but it had ceased ere I reached the further wall, and then from the other end of the chamber came another voice, shrill and piercing. "Fools! Fools!" it shrieked. "Thinkest thou to defeat the eternal laws of life and death? Wouldst cheat the mysterious Ishas, goddess of death, of her just dues? Did not her mighty messenger, the ancient Ish, bear you up upon her laden bosom at your own behest to the Valley Dor? Thinkest thou, O fools, that Ishas wilt give up her own? Thinkest thou to escape from whence in all the countless ages but a single soul has fled? Go back the way thou camest, to the merciful maws of the children of the tree of life, or the gleaming fangs of the great white apes, for there lies speedy surcease from suffering, but insist in your rash purpose to thread the mazes of the golden cliffs of the mountains of Orts, past the ramparts of the impregnable fortresses of the holy Therns, and upon your way death in its most frightful form will overtake you, a death so horrible that even the holy Therns themselves, who conceive both life and death, avert their eyes from its fiendishness, and close their ears against the hideous shrieks of its victims. Go back, O fools, the way thou camest." And then the awful laugh broke out from another part of the chamber. "Most uncanny," I remarked, turning to Tarkas. "What shall we do?" he asked. "We cannot fight empty air. I would almost sooner return and face foes into whose flesh I may feel my blade bite, and know that I am selling my carcass dearly before I go down to that eternal oblivion which is evidently the fairest and most desirable eternity that mortal man has the right to hope for." "If, as you say, we cannot fight empty air, Tarkas," I replied, "neither, on the other hand, can empty air fight us. I, who have faced and conquered in my time thousands of sinewy warriors and tempered blades, shall not be turned back by wind, nor no more shall you, Thark. But unseen voices may emanate from unseen and unseeable creatures who wield invisible blades," answered the green warrior. "Rot, Tarkas," I cried. "Those voices come from beings as real as you or I. In their vein flows lifeblood that may be let as easily as ours, and the fact that they remain invisible to us is the best proof to my mind that they are mortal, nor overly courageous mortals at that. Think you, Tarkas, that John Carter will fly at the first shriek of a cowardly foe who dare not come out into the open and face a good blade?" I had spoken in a loud voice that there might be no question that our would-be terrorizers should hear me, for I was tiring of this nerve-racking fiasco. It had occurred to me, too, that the whole business was but a plan to frighten us back into the valley of death from which we had escaped, that we might be quickly disposed of by the savage creatures there. For a long period there was silence. Then of a sudden a soft stealthy sound behind me caused me to turn suddenly to behold a great many-legged banth creeping sinuously upon me. The banth is a fierce beast of prey that roams the low hills surrounding the dead seas of ancient Mars. Like nearly all Martian animals, it is almost hairless, having only a great bristly mane about its thick neck. Its long, lithe body is supported by 10 powerful legs. Its enormous jaws are equipped like those of a Kalit or Martian hound, with several rows of long needle-like fangs. Its mouth reaches to the point far back of its tiny ears, while its enormous protruding eyes of green add the last touch of terror to its awful aspect. As it crept toward me it lashed its powerful tail against its yellow sides, and when it saw that it was discovered it emitted the terrifying roar which often freezes its prey into momentary paralysis in the instant that it makes its spring. And so it launched its great bulk toward me, but its mighty voice had held no paralyzing terrors for me, and it met cold steel instead of the tender flesh its cruel jaws gaped so widely to engulf. An instant later I drew my blade from the still heart of this great Barsoomian lion, and turning toward Tarkas, was surprised to see him facing a similar monster. No sooner had he dispatched his than I, turning as though drawn by the instinct of my guardian subconscious mind, beheld another of the savage denizens of the Martian wilds leaping across the chamber toward me. From then on, for the better part of an hour, one hideous creature after another was launched upon us, springing apparently from the empty air about us. Tars Tarkas was satisfied. Here was something tangible that he could cut and slash with his great blade, while I, for my part, may say that the diversions was a marked improvement over the uncanny voices from unseen lips. That there was nothing supernatural about our new foes was well evidenced by their howls of rage and pain as they felt the sharp steel at their vitals, and the very real blood which flowed from their severed arteries as they died the real death. I noticed during the period of this new persecution that the beast appeared only when our backs were turned. We never saw one really materialize from thin air. Nor did I for an instant sufficiently lose my excellent reasoning faculties to be once deluded into the belief that the beast came into the room other than through some concealed and well-contrived doorway. Among the ornaments of Tars Tarkas's leather harness, which is the only manner of clothing worn by Martians other than silk capes and robes of silk and fur for protection from the cold after dark, was a small mirror, about the bigness of a lady's hand-glass, which hung midway between his shoulders and his waist against his broad back. Once as he stood looking down at a newly fallen antagonist, my eyes happened to fall upon this mirror, and in its shiny surface I saw pictured a sight that caused me to whisper, "Move not, Tars Tarkas, move not a muscle." He did not ask why, but stood like a graven image while my eyes watched the strange thing that meant so much to us. What I saw was the quick movement of a section of the wall behind me. It was turning upon pivots, and with it a section of the floor directly in front of it was turning. It was as though you placed a visiting card upon end on a silver dollar that you had laid flat upon a table, so that the edge of the card perfectly bisected the surface of the coin. The card might represent the section of the wall that turned, and the silver dollar the section of the floor. Both were so nicely fitted into the adjacent portions of the floor and wall that no crack had been noticeable in the dim light of the chamber. As the turn was half completed, a great beast was revealed sitting upon its haunches upon that part of the revolving floor that had been on the opposite side before the wall commenced to move. When the section stopped, the beast was facing toward me on the other side of that partition. It was very simple. But what had interested me most was the sight that the half-turned section had presented through the opening that it had made, a great chamber, well lighted, in which were several men and women chained to the wall, and in front of them, evidently directing and operating the movement of the secret doorway, a wicked-faced man, neither red, as are the red men of Mars, nor green, as are the green men, but white, like myself, with a great mass of flowing yellow hair. The prisoners behind him were red Martians. Chained with them were a number of fierce beasts, such as had been turned upon us, and others equally as ferocious. As I turned to meet my new foe, it was with a heart considerably lightened. "Watch the wall at your end of the chamber, Tars Tarkas," I cautioned. "It is through secret doorways in the wall that the brutes are loosed upon us." I was very close to him, and spoke in a low whisper, that my knowledge of their secret might not be disclosed to our tormentors. As long as we remained each facing an opposite end of the apartment, no further attacks were made upon us. So it was quite clear to me that the partitions were in some way pierced that our actions might be observed from without. At length a plan of action occurred to me, and backing quite close to Tars Tarkas, I unfolded my scheme in a low whisper, keeping my eyes still glued upon my end of the room. The great Thark grunted his assent to my proposition when I had done, and in accordance with my plan commenced backing toward the wall which I faced, while I advanced slowly ahead of him. When we had reached a point some 10 feet from the secret doorway, I halted my companion, and cautioning him to remain absolutely motionless until I gave the prearranged signal, I quickly turned my back to the door through which I could almost feel the burning and baleful eyes of our would-be executioner. Instantly my own eyes sought the mirror upon Tars Tarkas's back, and in another second I was closely watching the section of the wall which had been disgorging its savage terrors upon us. I had not long to wait, for presently the golden surface commenced to move rapidly. Scarcely had it started than I gave the signal to Tarkas, and simultaneously springing from the receding half of the pivoting door, in like manner the Thark wheeled and leaped from the opening being made by the inswinging section. A single bound carried me completely through into the adjoining room, and brought me face to face with the fellow whose cruel face I had seen before. He was about my own height, and well muscled, and in every outward detail moulded precisely as our Earthmen. At his side hung a long sword, a short sword, and a dagger, and one of the destructive radium revolvers that are common upon Mars. The fact that I was armed only with a long sword, and so according to the laws and ethics of battle, everywhere upon Barsoom should only have been met with a similar or lesser weapon, seemed to have no effect upon the moral sense of my enemy, for he whipped out his revolver ere I scarce had touched the floor by his side. But an uppercut from my longsword sent it flying from his grasp before he could discharge it. Instantly he drew his longsword, and thus evenly armed we set to, in earnest for one of the closest battles I ever have fought. The fellow was a marvellous swordsman, and evidently in practice, while I had not gripped the hilt of a sword for 10 long years before that morning. But it did not take me long to fall easily into my fighting stride, so that in a few minutes the man began to realize that he had at last met his match. His face became livid with rage as he found my guard impregnable, while blood flowed from a dozen minor wounds upon his face and body. "Who are you, white man?" he hissed. "That you are no Barsoomian from the outer world is evident from your color, and you are not of us." His last statement was almost a question. What if I were from the temple of Ishus? I hazarded on a wild guess. "Fate forfend!" he exclaimed, his face going white under the blood that now nearly covered it. I did not know how to follow up my lead, but I carefully laid the idea away for future use should circumstances require it. His answer indicated that for all he knew I might be from the temple of Ishus, and in it were men like unto myself, and either this man feared the inmates of the temple, or else he held their persons or their power in such reverence that he trembled to think of the harm and indignities he had heaped upon one of them. But my present business with him was of a different nature than that which requires any considerable abstract reasoning. It was to get my sword between his ribs, and this I succeeded in doing within the next few seconds, nor was I an instant too soon. The chained prisoners had been watching the combat in tense silence. Not a sound had fallen in the room other than the clashing of our contending blades, the soft shuffling of our naked feet, and the few whispered words we had hissed at each other through clenched teeth the while we continued our mortal duel. But as the body of my antagonist sank in an inert mass to the floor, a cry of warning broke from one of the female prisoners. "Turn! Turn! Behind you!" she shrieked, and as I wheeled at the first note of her shrill cry, I found myself facing a second man of the same race as he who lay at my feet. The fellow had crept stealthily from the dark corridor, and was almost upon me with raised sword ere I saw him. Tarkas was nowhere in sight, and the secret panel in the wall through which I had come was closed. How I wished that he were by my side now! I had fought almost continuously for many hours. I had passed through such experiences and adventures as must sap the vitality of man, and with all this I had not eaten for nearly 24 hours, nor slept. I was fagged out, and for the first time in years felt a question as to my ability to cope with an antagonist, but there was naught else for it than to engage my man, and that as quickly and ferociously as lay in me, for my only salvation was to rush him off his feet by the impetuosity of my attack. I could not hope to win a long drawn-out battle, but the fellow was evidently of another mind, for he backed and parried and sidestepped until I was almost completely fagged from the exertion of attempting to finish him. He was a more adroit swordsman, if possible, than my previous foe, and I must admit that he led me a pretty chase, and in the end came near to making a sorry fool of me. and a dead one into the bargain. I could feel myself growing weaker and weaker, until at length objects commenced to blur before my eyes, and I staggered and blundered about more asleep than awake. And then it was that he worked his pretty little coup that came near to losing me my life. He had backed me around so that I stood in front of the corpse of his fellow, and then he rushed me suddenly so that I was forced back upon it, and as my heel struck it the impetus of my body flung me backward across the dead man. My head struck the hard pavement with a resounding whack, and to that alone I owe my life, for it cleared my brain and the pain roused my temper, so that I was equal for the moment to tearing my enemy to pieces with my bare hands. And I verily believe that I should have attempted it had not my right hand, in the act of raising my body from the ground, came in contact with a bit of cold metal. As the eyes of the layman, so is the hand of the fighting man when it comes in contact with an implement of his vocation, and thus I did not need to look or reason to know that the dead man's revolver, laying where it had fallen when I struck it with my grasp, was at my disposal. The fellow whose ruse had put me down was springing toward me, the point of his gleaming blade directed straight at my heart, and as he came there rang from his lips the cruel and mocking peal of laughter that I had heard within the chamber of mystery. And so he died, his thin lips curled in the snarl of his hateful laugh, and a bullet from the revolver of his dead companion bursting into his heart. His body, borne by the impetus of his headlong rush, plunged upon me. The hilt of his sword must have struck my head, for with the impact of the corpse I lost consciousness. End of chapter 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Gods of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs and read by J.D. Weber on the south shores of Lake Superior. Chapter 4. Thuvia. It was the sound of conflict that aroused me once more to the realities of life. For a moment I could neither place my surroundings nor locate the sounds which had aroused me. And then from beyond the blank wall beside which I lay I heard the shuffling of feet, the snarling of grim beasts, the clank of metal accoutrement, and the heavy breathing of a man. As I rose to my feet I glanced hurriedly about the chamber in which I had just encountered such a warm reception. The prisoners and the savage brutes rested in their chains by the opposite wall, eyeing me with varying expressions of curiosity, sullen rage, surprise, and hope. The latter emotion seemed plainly evident upon the handsome and intelligent face of the young red Martian woman whose cry of warning had been instrumental in saving my life. She was the perfect type of that remarkably beautiful race whose outward appearance is identical with the more godlike races of Earthmen, except that this higher race of Martians is of a light reddish copper color. As she was entirely unadorned, I could not even guess her station in life, though it was evident that she was either a prisoner or slave in her present environment. It was several seconds before the sounds upon the opposite side of the partition jolted my slowly returning faculties into a realization of their probable import, and then of a sudden I grasped the fact that they were caused by Tarkus in what was evidently a desperate struggle with wild beasts or savage men. With a cry of encouragement I threw my weight against the secret door, but as well have essayed the down-hurling of the cliffs themselves. Then I sought feverishly for the secret of the revolving panel, but my search was fruitless, and I was about to raise my longsword against the sullen gold when the young woman prisoner called out to me, "Save thy sword, O mighty warrior, for thou shalt need it more where it will avail to some purpose. Shatter it not against the senseless metal which yields better to the lightest finger-touch of one who knows its secret." "Know you the secret of it, then?" I asked. "Yes," Release me, and I will give you entrance to the other horror chamber if you wish. The keys to my fetters are upon the first dead of thy foemen. But why would you return to face again the fierce Banth, or whatever other form of destruction they have loosed within that awful trap?" "Because my friend fights there alone," I answered, as I hastily sought and found the keys upon the carcass of the dead custodian of this grim chamber of horrors. There were many keys upon the oval ring, but the fair Martian maid quickly selected that which sprung the great lock at her waist, and freed, she hurried toward the secret panel. Again she sought out a key upon the ring, this time a slender needle-like affair, which she inserted in an almost invisible hole in the wall. Instantly the door swung upon its pivot, and the contiguous section of the floor upon which I was standing carried me with it into the chamber where Tars Tarkas fought. The great Thark stood with his back against an angle of the walls, while facing him in a semicircle a half-dozen huge monsters crouched waiting for an opening. Their blood-streaked heads and shoulders testified to the cause of their wariness, as well as to the swordsmanship of the green warrior, whose glossy hide bore the same mute but eloquent witness to the ferocity of the attacks that he had so far withstood. Sharp talons and cruel fangs had torn leg, arm, and breast literally to ribbons. So weak was he from continued exertion and loss of blood that but for the supporting wall I doubt that he even could have stood erect. But with the tenacity and indomitable courage of his kind he still faced his cruel and relentless foes, the personification of that ancient proverb of his tribe, "Leave to a Thark his head and one hand, and he may yet conquer." As he saw me enter, a grim smile touched those grim lips of his, but whether the smile signified relief or merely amusement at the sight of my own bloody and dishevelled condition I do not know. As I was about to spring into the conflict with my sharp longsword, I felt a gentle hand upon my shoulder, and turning found, to my surprise, that the young woman had followed me into the chamber. "Wait," she whispered. "Leave them to me," and pushing me, advanced all defenceless and unarmed upon the snarling Banths. When quite close to them, she spoke a single Martian word in low but peremptory tones. Like lightning the great beast wheeled upon her, and I looked to see her torn to pieces before I could reach her side, but instead the creature slunk to her feet like puppies that expect a merited whipping. Again she spoke to them, but in tones so low I could not catch the words, and then she started toward the opposite side of the chamber, with the 6 mighty monsters trailing at heel. One by one she sent them through the secret panel into the room beyond, and when the last had passed from the chamber where we stood in wide-eyed amazement, she turned and smiled at us, and then herself passed through, leaving us alone. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Tars Tarkas said, "I heard the fighting beyond the partition through which you passed, but I did not fear for you, John Carter, until I heard the report of a revolver shot. I knew that there lived no man upon all Barsoom who could face you with naked steel and live, but the shot stripped that last vestige of hope from me, since you I knew to be without firearms. Tell me of it." I did as he bade, and then together we sought the secret panel through which I had just entered the apartment, the one at the opposite end of the room from that through which the girl had led her savage companions. To our disappointment, the panel eluded our every effort to negotiate its secret lock. We felt that once beyond it we might look with some little hope of success for a passage to the outside world. The fact that the prisoners within were securely chained led us to believe that surely there must be an avenue of escape from the terrible creatures which inhabited this unspeakable place. Again and again we turned from one door to another, from the baffling golden panel at one end of the chamber to its mate at the other, equally baffling. When we had about given up all hope, one of the panels turned silently toward us, and the young woman who had led away the Banth stood once more beside us. "Who are you," she asked, "and what your mission, that you have the temerity to attempt to escape from the Valley Dor and the death you have chosen?" "I have chosen no death, maiden," I replied. "I am not of Barsoom, nor have I taken yet the voluntary pilgrimage upon the river Ish. My friend here is Jeddak of all the Tharks, and though he has not yet expressed a desire to return to the living world, I am taking him with me from the living lie that hath lured him in this frightful place." I am of another world. I am John Carter, Prince of the House of Tardos Mors, Jeddak of Helium. Perchance some faint rumor of me may have leaked within the confines of your hellish abode." She smiled. "Yes," she replied, "naught that passes in the world we have left is unknown here. I have heard of you many years ago. The Therns have ofttimes wondered whether you had flown, since you had neither taken the pilgrimage, nor could be found upon the face of Barsoom." "Tell me," I said, "and who be you, and why a prisoner, yet with power over the ferocious beasts of the place that denotes familiarity and authority far beyond that which might be expected of a prisoner? Or a slave?" "Slave I am," she answered, "for 15 years a slave in this terrible place, and now that they have tired of me and become fearful of the power which my knowledge of their ways has given me, I am but recently condemned to die the death." She shuddered. "What death?" I asked. "The holy Therns eat human flesh," she answered me, "but only that which has died beneath the sucking lips of a plant man, flesh from which the defiling blood of life has been drawn. And to this cruel end I have been condemned. It was to be within a few hours, had your advent not caused an interruption of their plans." "Was it then the holy Therns who felt the weight of John Carter's hand?" I asked. "Oh no, those whom you laid low are lesser Therns, but of the same cruel and hateful race. The holy Therns abide upon the outer slopes of these grim hills, facing the broad world from which they harvest their victims and their spoils. Labyrinthine passages connect these caves with the luxurious palaces of the holy Therns, and through them pass upon their many duties the lesser Therns, and hordes of slaves and prisoners and fierce beasts, the grim inhabitants of this sunless world. There be within this vast network of winding passages and countless chambers men, women, and beasts who, born within its dim and gruesome underworld, have never seen the light of day, nor ever shall. They are kept to do the bidding of the race of Therns, to furnish at once their sport and their sustenance. Now and again some hapless pilgrim, drifting out upon the silent seas from the cold Ish, escapes the plant man and the great white apes that guard the temple of Ishus, and falls into the remorseless clutches of the Therns. Or, as was my misfortune, is coveted by the holy Therns, who chances to be upon watch in the balcony above the river where it issues from the bowels of the mountains through the cliffs of gold to empty into the lost sea of Korish. All who reach the Valley Dor are, by custom, the rightful prey of the plant man and the apes, while their arms and ornaments become the portions of the Therns. But if one escapes the terrible denizens of the valley for even a few hours, the Therns may claim such a one as their own. And again the holy Therns on watch, should he see a victim he covets, often tramples upon the rights of the unreasoning brutes of the valley, and takes his prize by foul means if he cannot gain it by fair. It is said that occasionally some deluded victim of Barsoomian superstition will so far escape the clutches of the countless enemies that beset his path from the moment that he emerges from the subterranean passage through which the Ish flows for 1,000 miles before it enters the Valley Dor, as to reach the very walls of the temple Ishus. But what fate awaits one there not even the holy Therns may guess, for who has passed within those gilded walls never has returned to unfold the mysteries they have held since the beginning of time. The temple of Ishus is to the Therns what the Valley Dor is imagined by the peoples of the outer world to be to them. It is the ultimate haven of peace, refuge, and happiness, to which they pass after this life, and wherein an eternity of eternities is spent amidst the delights of the flesh, which appeal most strongly to this race of mental giants and moral pygmies. The temple of Ishus is, I take it, a heaven within a heaven, I said. Let us hope that there it will be meted to the Therns as they have meted it here unto others. Who knows? The girl murmured. The Therns, I judge from what you have said, are no less mortal than we, and yet have I always heard them spoken of with the utmost awe and reverence by the people of Barsoom, as one might speak of the gods themselves. The Therns are mortal, she replied. They die from the same causes as you or I might. Those who do not live their allotted span of life 1,000 years, when by the authority of custom they may take their way in happiness through the long tunnel that leads to Ishus. Those who die before are supposed to spend the balance of their allotted time in the image of a plant man, and it is for this reason that the plant men are held sacred by the Therns, since they believe that each of these hideous creatures was formerly a Thern. And should a plant man die, I asked? Should he die before the expiration of the 1,000 years from the birth of the Thern whose immortality abides within him, then the soul passes into a great white ape. But should the ape die short of the exact hour that terminates the 1,000 years, the soul is forever lost and passes for all eternity into the carcass of the slimy, fearsome Scyllaean, whose wriggling thousands seethe the silent sea beneath the hurtling moons when the sun has gone and strange shapes walk through the Valley Dor. We sent several holy Therns to the Scyllaeans today, then, said Tars Tarkas, laughing. And so will your death be the more terrible when it comes, said the maiden. And come it will, you cannot escape. One has escaped centuries ago, I reminded her, and what has been done may be done again. It is useless even to try, she answered hopelessly. But try we shall, I cried, and you shall go with us, if you wish. To be put to death by my own people and render my memory a disgrace to my family and my nation? A prince of the house of Tardos Mors should know better than to suggest such a thing. Tars Tarkas listened in silence. But I could feel his eyes riveted upon me, and I knew that he awaited my answer as one might listen to the reading of a sentence by the foreman of a jury. What I advised the girl to do would seal our fate as well, since if I bowed to the inevitable decree of age-old superstition, we must all remain and meet our fate in some horrible form within this awful abode of horror and cruelty. We have the right to escape if we can, I answered. Our own moral senses will not be offended if we succeed, for we know that the fabled life of love and peace in the blessed Valley of Dor is a rank and wicked deception. We know that the valley is not sacred. We know that the holy Therns are not holy, that they are a race of cruel and heartless mortals, knowing no more of the real life to come than we do. Not only is it our right to bend every effort to escape, it is the solemn duty from which we should not shrink even though we know that we should be reviled and tortured by our own peoples when we return to them. Only thus may we carry the truth to those without, and though the likelihood of our narrative being given credence is, I grant you, remote, so wedded are mortals to their stupid infatuation for impossible superstitions, we should be craven cowards indeed were we to shirk the plain duty which confronts us. Again, there is a chance that with the weight of the testimony of the several of us, the truth of our statements may be accepted, and at least a compromise effected, which will result in the dispatching of an expedition of investigation to this hideous mockery of heaven. Both the girl and the green warrior stood silent in thought for some moments. The former it was who eventually broke the silence. Never had I considered the matter in that light before, she said. Indeed, would I give my life 1,000 times if I could but save a single soul from the awful life that I have led in this cruel place. Yes, you are right, and I will go with you as far as we can go, but I doubt that we ever shall escape. I turned an inquiring glance toward the Thark. To the gates of Ishus, or to the bottom of Chorus, spoke the green warrior. To the snows to the north, or to the snows to the south, Tars Tarkas follows where John Carter leads. I have spoken. Come then, I cried, we must make the start, for we could not be further from escape than we now are in the heart of this mountain, and within the 4 walls of this chamber of death. Come then, said the girl, but do not flatter yourselves that you can find no worse place than this within the territory of the Therns. So saying, she swung the secret panel that separated us from the apartment in which I found her, and we stepped through once more into the presence of other prisoners. There were in all 10 red Martians, men and women, and when we had briefly explained our plan they decided to join forces with us, though it was evident that it was with some considerable misgivings that they thus tempted fate by opposing an ancient superstition, even though each knew through cruel experience the fallacy of its entire fabric. Thuvia, the girl whom I had first freed, soon had the others at liberty. Tars Tarkas and I stripped the bodies of the 2 Therns of their weapons, which included swords, daggers, and 2 revolvers of the curious and deadly type manufactured by the Red Martians. We distributed the weapons as far as they would go among our followers, giving the firearms to 2 of the women, Thuvia being one so armed. With the ladder as our guide, we set off rapidly but cautiously through a maze of passages, crossing great chambers hewn from the solid metal of the cliff, following the winding corridors, ascending steep inclines, and now and again concealing ourselves in dark recesses at the sound of approaching footsteps. Our destination, Thuvia said, was a distant storeroom where arms and ammunition in plenty might be found. From there she was to lead us to the summit of the cliffs, from where it would require both wondrous wit and mighty fighting to win our way through the very heart of the stronghold of the Holy Therns to the world without. And even then, O Prince, she cried, the arm of the Holy Thern is long. It reaches to every nation of Barsoom. His secret temples are hidden in the heart of every community. Wherever we go, should we escape, we shall find that word of our coming has preceded us, and death awaits us before we may pollute the air with our blasphemies. We had proceeded for possibly an hour without serious interruption, and Thuvia had just whispered to me that we were approaching our first destination, when on entering a great chamber we came upon a man, evidently a Thern. He wore, in addition to his leathern trappings and jeweled ornaments, a great circlet of gold about his brow, in the exact center of which was set an immense stone, the exact counterpart of that which I had seen upon the breast of the little old man at the atmosphere plant nearly 20 years before. It is the one priceless jewel of Barsoom. Only 2 are known to exist, and these were worn as the insignia of their rank and position by the 2 old men in whose charge was placed the operation of the great engines which pump the artificial atmosphere to all parts of Mars from the huge atmosphere plant, the secret to whose mighty portals placed in my possession the ability to save from immediate extinction the life of a whole world. The stone worn by the Therns who confronted us was of about the same size as that which I had seen before, an inch in diameter, I should say. It scintillated 9 different and distinct rays, the 7 primary colors of our earthly prism, and the 2 rays which are unknown upon earth, but whose wondrous beauty is indescribable. As the Thern saw us, his eyes narrowed to 2 nasty slits. "Stop!" he cried. "What means this, Thuvia?" For answer the girl raised her revolver and fired point blank at him. Without a sound he sank to the earth, dead. "Beast!" she hissed. "After all these years I am at last revenged." Then as she turned toward me, evidently with a word of explanation on her lips, her eyes suddenly widened as they rested upon me, and with a little exclamation she started toward me. "O Prince!" she cried, "fate is indeed kind to us. The way is still difficult, but through this vile thing upon the floor we may yet win to the outer world. Notest thou not the remarkable resemblance between the Holy Thern and thyself?" The man was indeed of my precise stature, nor were his eyes and features unlike mine, but his hair was a mass of flowing yellow locks, like those of the 2 I had killed, while mine is black and close cropped. "What of the resemblance?" I asked the girl Thuvia. "Do you wish me, with my black short hair, to pose as a yellow-haired priest of this infernal cult?" She smiled, and for answer approached the body of the man she had slain, and kneeling beside it removed the circlet of gold from the forehead, and then to my utter amazement lifted the entire scalp bodily from the corpse's head. Rising, she advanced to my side, and placing the yellow wig over my black hair, crowned me with the golden circlet set with the magnificent gem. "Now don his harness, Prince," she said, "and you may pass where you will in the realms of the Therns," for Sator Throg was a holy Thern of the 10th cycle, and mighty among his kind. As I stooped to the dead man to do her bidding, I noted that not a hair grew upon his head, which was quite as bald as an egg. "They are all thus from birth," explained Thuvia, noting my surprise. "The race from which they sprang were crowned with a luxuriant growth of golden hair, but for many years the present race has been entirely bald. The wig, however, has come to be a part of their apparel, and so important a part do they consider it that it is cause for the deepest disgrace were a Thern to appear in public without it." In another moment I stood garbed in the habiliments of a holy Thern. At Thuvia's suggestion 2 of the released prisoners bore the body of the dead Thern upon their shoulders with us as we continued our journey toward the storeroom, which we reached without further mishap. Here the keys which Thuvia bore from the dead Thurn of the prison vault were the means of giving us immediate entrance to the chamber, and very quickly we were thoroughly outfitted with arms and ammunition. By this time I was so thoroughly fagged out that I could go no further, so I threw myself upon the floor, bidding Tars Tarkas to do likewise, and cautioning 2 of the released prisoners to keep careful watch. In an instant I was asleep. End of chapter 4.